Welcome back to the Doc Talk podcast and Happy New Year. We're excited to share our very first episode of 2025 with you.
I'm Dr. Shazma Mithani. I'm an emergency doctor in Edmonton.
And I'm Dr. Sheila Wijayasinghe, a family doctor in Toronto. So for today's episode, we have something a little different. Usually we have you, our listeners, send us a question. But for today, I'm asking the questions of Shaz around how do we avoid going to the emergency room with some simple tips because she's seen everything in her work. Shaz, what's it like right now in the emergency room for you?
Yeah, so the Emerge has been extremely busy. I worked over Christmas, so 23rd, 24th, 25th. And typically in the past, we've seen like a Christmas slowdown where people don't tend to come in on Christmas Eve and Christmas and then tend to kind of present after that. That did not happen this year. Lots of sort of things that are definitely have been like preventable illnesses. I mean, if you follow me on social media, you know that a lot of what I do and Sheila, what you do as well is like centered around kind of health empowerment, health information, but also preventative health, because as we both know as physicians, the best medicine is prevention. And so that's really why I wanted to chat with you about this today in terms of trying to make sure that our listeners know different things in kind of ranging through multiple categories of ways that we can keep people out of the Emerge and keep people away from seeing myself and my colleagues.
I know it's so busy. So if we can offer these tips, I know a lot of parents ask me these things around like, what do you do? What don't you do as a family doctor? And that's really going to be my question to you, Shaz. It's like, what don't you do as an emergency room doc, as a mom, as someone who has seen all of these things? We know that injuries are the leading cause of hospitalization for Canadians between the age of 1 to 34. And like you said, it's so busy in the emergency room. We see approximately 4.2 to 4.5 million Canadians have visited an emergency department for injuries specifically. And so that is a huge number. Like that's not just general care that people are seeking support for. It's for injuries that are preventable. And so my question for you, Shaz, today is, what don't you do as an emergency room doctor for both, keeping kids out of the emergency, keeping your own kids out of the emergency room, and your loved ones who are adults?
Yeah, there are actually a lot. So we knew we were doing this episode. I've been thinking about kind of the things, because for me, it almost feels like second nature now of like things that I don't do, that I, make sure that my family doesn't do, that my kids don't do, or that I don't kind of avoid these different circumstances. And so I hope that none of this sounds controversial. It might be. I don't know. We'll see. And then I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on some of these things as well. But like the big thing for me, I mean, so in the pediatric world, head injuries are a big one for me. So there are so many different situations where head injuries could be predicted, are preventable. And the one thing that kind of stands out to me is, of course, like helmets. So I know that everybody thinks like, okay, bicycle helmet. Yes, check mark, right? But there's so many other circumstances where helmets need to be worn as well. Skiing, snowboarding, other sorts of snow sports. Tobogganing or sledding is one thing that people always forget about. So if you think about it, when you're going sledding, like think about how fast, like especially if there's an icy patch, like how fast you or your child are going down the hill. There could be trees somewhere. There could be, a rock hidden in the snow, or if they fall backwards and they hit their head on the back of the rock. So that's so not just cycling, right? Snow sports as well.
That's a really big one. I think people miss the sledding one because I see regularly on social media and in our own lives, like when we go to this hill, people aren't wearing helmets because I don't think that we think about it in the same way. And when we grew up as kids, like we were flying down those hills, right?
Exactly.
No helmets,
and like not wearing helmets.
Like there was like steel blades on the bottom of the actual sleds that we were on, and it was quite dangerous. Whereas now we have these options and we talk about it more, and that's important. So not just what you said, not just with biking.
Yeah, not just with biking or, like skateboarding, rollerblading, but like lots of ice skating is another one, right?
Another one.
Over Christmas, we went to just our local outdoor rink with the kids after we opened presents. And it was like, it's so great now because my kids just know that like this is we do these activities and the helmets come on, and they're almost like the helmet police too. Like, just, Kate, mom, got to put our helmets on, which is so great. So they're the ones that are kind of anticipating this and knowing that the way to keep yourself safe and to keep your brain safe, because you only have one brain. That's what I always tell my kids, is to protect it and put that helmet on. Horseback riding is another one too, from a helmet standpoint. Yeah.
That's
so
really
like
important.
things that we don't often think about. I think, especially like kind of out in public education and public health and injury prevention, like we always talk about helmets with bicycles.
Yeah.
But we never talk about helmets with other also dangerous for head injury activities.
For sure. And it's interesting because we're talking about kids here, but when I talk to my patients in my practice who may have kids or little ones in their lives in different forms, like their uncles or aunts, I say, listen, like your kids are watching what you're doing as well. And so not just for teaching them that helmets are important, but also important for their own head safety and their brain safety. I always emphasize that for my adult patients as well, that certainly you are modeling this behavior for children, but also really importantly, equally importantly, we're trying to keep your head safe as well.
And I think that's a really great point, because the role modeling aspect for an adult and their children around them, like whether it's a parent, a grandparent, aunt, uncle, whatever. One of my biggest pet peeves is seeing a family, let's say bicycling, right? Or doing some sort of activity and the kids are wearing helmets and the parents are not wearing helmets. And the thing that really frustrates me about that is that, as soon as that child is on their own and not with their family anymore, when they've seen that, it's, mom and dad are not wearing helmets and that's okay. Maybe when I get older, I don't have to wear a helmet. It sets that kind of narrative in their mind that like, maybe I don't always have to wear a helmet. Right. And so that modeling and role modeling piece is such an important thing to bring up too.
So head injuries are something that you commonly will see in the emergency. I know in pediatrics, we often are seeing kids go in and being monitored after a head injury or a fall. Can we talk a little bit about something, especially over the holidays, that I was sharing a lot online, and we talk about things like that get ingested. So things that kids may get their hands on and eat, and specifically tell us about how we avoid that. So things like button batteries, magnets, those kinds of things that are common in the toys that maybe we shared with our kids. What's the concern about button batteries? We saw several, like over 100 button battery injuries in Canada in 2020, based on the latest stats in emergency room visits. Like, what is worrisome about button batteries in particular, and what have you seen this in the Emerge?
Yes, I have. So the two big things, so you mentioned them both, button batteries and the rare earth magnets. And so those are like the really, really strong magnets, right? And so there are lots of toys that have both of these things. So button batteries are common for things like watches or like other sorts of little things that light up. Those like little, like the lights that you can put on your fingers, like any sort of like small electronic device that requires batteries often has a button battery in it. So lots of toys that have these in them. And then with the magnets, there are lots of different like kind of like toys as well, or like those little balls that kind of stick together, right? Like there are a lot of different toys that have the rare earth magnets, which are particularly strong. And so with both of those, there's a significant risk of esophagus and bowel injury. And so with the button battery in particular, it essentially, like as soon as it touches moisture, so as soon as it touches moisture, so a child swallows it, it can sit in the esophagus. So that's the swallowing tube between your mouth and your stomach. And it sits against, like, this is a very hydrated and water-rich environment. And so it sits against the wall of the esophagus. And as soon as it touches water, it starts to react and starts to erode through that tissue. And in a matter of like 20 to 30 minutes, there is significant damage. And in a matter of like up to even just 1 or 2 hours, it can erode all the way through. That is a big injury that is extremely life-threatening. And so basically it can erode through the esophagus. It can keep, like, your lungs are around there. And so it can keep going through to your lungs as well. And so this is a really, really big concerning injury. And yes, I have seen this happen. Button batteries and noses as well, same thing, right? So there's lots of moisture and water in the nose. And so it sits there and it starts to erode through typically through the cartilage in the middle, the septum in the nose. And so these are all very dangerous injuries. And this is something where avoidance is key, right? And so trying to just keep anything with button batteries out of the home to begin with. Or B, if you think that your child might have been exposed to a button battery, like, getting them into the ER right away. There is some good evidence to show that eating or drinking honey actually prevents the degree of injury or slows down the injury because it essentially coats the battery, I think is what we think happens, right? So molasses or honey kind of coats the battery and then prevents it from, or like decreases that contact with the wall of the esophagus and prevents that erosion from happening.
So that's really very key what you just said around keeping devices either out of your home or out of children's reach. Sometimes we can't help, but they're in our watches. They're in places that we use and devices that we use. I keep our batteries in a lockbox, basically, like above reach. I'm very paranoid about it. I remember seeing this as a resident when I was doing an emerge shift. I saw a button battery injury. It caused damage to the lungs, as you said, in a child, and it really made a mark in my life where I'm like, these are things that we have to avoid. We often hold on to batteries even after they've been used. Is discarding of them carefully. There's safe disposal ways of discarding them just to keep them out of the house or at least out of reach of kiddos, because kids put things in their mouth, in their nose, and different parts of their body, and this is a way to avoid it. No, Claire, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point about like treating it the same way as a medication, right? So we keep our medications locked and up high. This is another dangerous thing that like if it's ingested or put in the mouth, it is dangerous. And so I love that you like treat it the same way as the other kind of dangerous substances in your house, as you keep it locked and away from reach. When it comes to magnets, the issue here is, as you can imagine, because they stick together so tightly, if it's just one magnet, not a big deal. It's when we have more than one magnet where it becomes problematic. And so what we have seen, or what I have seen in the emerge, and what the risk is of happening, is that if one magnet is in one part of the bowel and then the other magnet travels down to another part of the bowel, they are still very strongly attracted to each other. And so they then still pinch together. There will be layers of bowel between those two magnets. And then it causes a significant amount of pressure that then erodes through the bowel and essentially causes a perforation of the bowel, which is, again, a life-threatening, very dangerous injury. And so this is why, for a different reason or a different mechanism than button batteries, but the same level of severity, why those rare earth magnets are extremely dangerous. And those are something that I actually just don't have them in my house at all. Like there's some things with button batteries that are unavoidable in terms of what like devices and stuff that we have, even adult devices that we have, like watches and things like that. But the rare earth magnets, I just like don't even keep them in my house, because not only is it an issue for humans, pets is another thing, right? Like button batteries and the rare earth magnets for pets can be equally dangerous.
That's a really good point, actually, especially because they're small and they can pick them up pretty easily. So that's super helpful. Thank you. So button batteries, magnets. Can we talk? I know we're in the new year and it's winter across Canada, so we may not see this as much, but one thing that can be a bit of a controversial take is around trampolines. I avoid trampolines for our kids. Tell me what you've seen in the emerge and what your guidance is around this.
Yeah, trampolines cause a lot of injuries. And the two big types of injuries that I see, or let's say three big types of injuries that I see, so head injuries, right? So if there's like multiple people in a trampoline, colliding of heads, or, a head with a knee or a head with another body part of like whoever else is in the trampoline with your child. So head injuries are a big one. So concussions, super, super common with trampolines. Fractures of bones. So like whether it's legs or arms, typically, I often see fractures, again, from collisions with other people in the trampoline, or if it's not a netted trampoline, falling off the trampoline, because they're like 4 to 5 feet off the ground or even higher sometimes. Ligamentous injuries, so those double bounces, right? So when there's another person on the trampoline, those double bounces can cause significant knee injuries typically, sometimes hip injuries, and then spinal cord injuries. That is the head and the neck, like those are like super scary areas for me as an emerge doc, because those are things that are potentially life-altering and irreversible. And so spinal cord injuries are a big one with trampolines as well. And so I'm interested to hear what your approach to trampolines is, and then I'll tell you kind of what my family's rules are.
Very similar. We avoid them. It's really tricky because we go to our friends' places. Some of them have trampolines, and we just have a conversation up front with the family that we're going to say, our kids just don't go on trampolines. It's not a judgment issue. Like, people make their own choices. And again, we want to emphasize it can feel really anxiety provoking to have these discussions that Shaz and I are having today. Our goal in doing this talk is really to inform and to help you make decisions for your own family. we're parents, we're doctors, we see these things, and that's why we want to share this with you. But it's not meant to scare you. It's meant to give you the information to make the decisions that are right for you. But really for ourselves, we've had a conversation. We're like, no trampolines. It's sort of a no-go. Our kids know that, but it is tricky, right? There are, bouncy castles. Like, I don't know what your take is on bouncy castles. They feel a little bit more benign because they're usually contained. There's less chance to do the double bounce, and the kids aren't falling off of it. I've seen injuries in bouncy castles as well. I'm sure you've seen injuries in bouncy castles.
Yeah, but you're right, because I don't actually see as many injuries with bouncy castles.
They're a bit more of a gentle bounce.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and certainly not like as firm of a surface either.
Yeah, it's like a soft cushion. So, sometimes that is sort of where we draw the line. I'm like, bouncy castles are okay, but our kids are outgrowing the bouncy castle, like the ones that feel the safest. So it is always like a back and forth discussion. But we sort of have these discussions regularly with our kids around these are decisions that we make. We do talk about what's your most important organ in your body, which is the brain. My daughter, who's wonderful, she's like, oh, your heart is, because that's where love is. I'm like, yes, that's great. And your brain is the most important.
Yes, those two most important organs.
Two most important things are the things. But that's our take. What do you do with your kids?
Yeah, so it is, I think one of the important things that you kind of alluded to is that for us in our family, it is an evolving discussion. And so just because, when they were younger, so my kids are 6 and almost 9. And when they were both kind of under the age of 5, it was like a hard no for any trampolines. And that has become an evolving discussion. And so for my older child, who's my daughter, the rule now is that she is allowed to be in one of those contained backyard trampolines. It has to be contained. It has to be springless, and she's allowed to be in there with one other person, with like boundaries in place and rules in place about like kind of, no horsing around and that sort of thing. With my younger child, my son, one only at a time, again, in one of those contained backyard springless trampolines. We do not allow trampoline parks though. So, those like kind of commercial places that have the foam ball pits, the like
and 100 children on one trampoline,
and 100 children on one trampoline, often like adults or like teenagers that have larger bodies compared to my small kids as well. I have seen significant injuries, significant spinal cord injuries from those trampoline parks as well. And so for me, that's actually something that although I say that things are an evolving discussion, I actually can't, because of the number of injuries that I've seen come in to emerge and like severe injuries. I'm not sure that one's ever going to be a yes for me. Which is hard because like there are lots of birthday parties and stuff there that the kids have to say no to. And so what I typically say is like, yeah, we can go there for like, usually it's like play first, cake after. I'll drop you off for the cake, or we'll go there for the cake so you can still be a part of the party, but not at the part that kind of is a boundary for our family.
Yeah, I mean, these are parenting challenges, right? Like to set those boundaries and to do that, that's part of our responsibility. We only have so long with our kids to be able to make those decisions and have those discussions, because when they age out in their teenage years, that's when it becomes more difficult to manage that. But it sounds like you're doing a really wonderful job of like setting those and the reason behind it. And of course, we're primed because we see these things a little bit more.
But I think you raised a really good point, because like I think there's often an instinct to just like put rules in to protect our kids. But I think a really important part is having the conversation with your kid too.
Yeah.
So that they understand why we're making the decisions that we are, that it's kind of a discussion, that they can have a good understanding of like, it's not just mom and dad being mean. It's, you only have one brain, you only have one heart, you only have one spinal cord. And this is why it's important to protect these things, because that's the only one you're going to get for the rest of your life. And then so hopefully that then sets them up for success when they aren't in our households or kind of under our immediate sphere of influence anymore, that they can then take that information to make good decisions when they're out in the world too.
For sure. Can we switch gears a little bit? I'd like to chat a little bit about choking. This is one of my biggest fears as a parent. I cut our kids' grapes into 4. I am very, very diligent around that sort of thing. We go to different parties. There's like full-size grapes sometimes, and it makes I kind of like hover around the table. That's because I've seen choking incidents. I myself choked when I was a kid, and I remember having to get the Heimlich maneuver because I was running with a hard candy in my mouth, and I had like one of those old Vicks triangular and it blocked my airway. And I had to have thankfully, there was a nurse in our group of family friends. I had the Heimlich maneuver. I share that with my kids as not to scare them, but just to be like, this is why we have certain rules around certain foods, why we cut certain foods, why we take our time, and why we don't run around with food in our mouth. But tell me what you see, what you kind of guide parents around choking hazards and specific risks.
Yeah. And so you kind of mentioned some of those big ones. There's like anything that's like circular, kind of around the size of a quarter or smaller, is particularly high risk for like an airway obstruction, either in a child or like older, teenager and adult. And so grapes are a big one. So cutting them into quarters. Hot dogs or sausages are another one as well, right? Cutting them into
lengthwise.
Exactly. Like cutting them lengthwise rather than cutting them in the coins that, we probably had when we were kids. Hard candies are another big one. So anything that kind of is that shape that is like firm is going to be a big choking hazard. One thing that you mentioned that was really important as well is being stationary while eating. That is a big, big rule in our house. You have to be sitting when you're eating. There is no walking or running with food in your mouth, because that, the example that you just gave of when you were a child, like that is a common circumstance in which choking can occur, is when the body is mobile while there's still food in the mouth. And so big rule in our house is you don't get to walk or run with food in your mouth. You're always either, worst case scenario, like standing stationary with me watching you, or sitting at the table. And like now my kids know to like do a mouth check. Like, are you done chewing your food? And they like basically open their mouth and stick their tongue out at me to show me that they're done their food before they like run off and play. And so that's another that's
a really great thing to suggest. Actually, that's a practical tip for parents. Do a mouth check before kids leave the table.
Do a mouth check, because like they're always like, yeah, I'm done. I want to go play. But I'm like, no, I need to see for sure that there's like not actually still a big wad of food in your mouth before you go literally run and play.
That's so important. It goes back to also the conversation around modeling behavior. Like I'll be sitting and standing up to go get something. I'll have food in my mouth. My kids have called me out for it. And they're like, you need to sit down. I'm like, you're right. Because if I'm going to be doing this, I'm also at risk of choking, right? Like we sometimes mindlessly go through things. We put things in our mouth. We're eating. We walk around. So it is a really good practice, again, for adult safety around choking, because adults also choke. It can be very scary to see somebody choking. And one thing that happens is when we choke, we walk away from group settings because it's embarrassing to us. And that's actually quite dangerous. And it's been found that when kids or adults choke, they walk away. So one of the other pieces that I teach our kids is don't walk away from the table or from whatever situation. You need to be around other people if you're choking and show them that you're choking.
Yeah, with that universal sign of choking, like hands around the neck. So,
totally. And then, because what happens is we naturally get a little embarrassed that we're making a noise and we walk away from other people, and then we're left without support. So that's a key piece that I teach our kids at a young age, to say, please don't walk away. And they actually have learned how to they have choked, because kids do choke. They choke on their water. They choke on other things. They stay and they kind of show me. But it's scary it's scary when it does happen.
And I think you bring up another really important point of that kind of reminded me, is that having first aid training, basic first aid training, is not only life-saving for your children, but for the other adults around you as well. And so I'm medical, so great. But my husband got first aid training before we had kids, or kind of as I was pregnant. My parents got first aid training because they often they provide a lot of childcare for our kids as well, just so that they are armed with this simple skills, like how to manage choking, which can be a life-saving intervention. So get your first aid up to date.
Yeah, we did the same. It's so helpful, and it gives you a little bit of extra confidence. Even with my medical training, I also get anxious when I see somebody choking, though. This is where, but having that training has been very helpful. I did the course with my parents and my husband as well, because it was helpful for me to have that refresher as well. So specifically cutting those items into the circular items, avoid giving hard candies, supervision and avoidance of getting up and walking around or running around with food in your mouth for that one. Tell me about one thing that you've mentioned to me before is around parking lot safety.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about parking lot safety and what you do as a doc/mom?
Yeah, so there are three big things that I have probably irrational fear about with my kids. The next one is the next topic, but choking, getting hit by a vehicle, and water, drowning. So we'll get to the drowning piece, but like we're basically talking about my 3 biggest fears in a row here. And
Sorry,
so
take a deep
no,
breath.
that's okay. No, but like, that's why this is really important to talk about. And like I said, like they're probably somewhat irrational, but like if you don't think about these things, there's no way to anticipate the safety around them, right? And so the big things for me, so parking lots, crossing the street, and driveways. We see so many accidental driveway injuries where it's like a parent or a loved one, like in just this terrible, devastating, like freak accidents where a kid runs out behind the car as like parent is backing out of the driveway or backing into the driveway. Parking lots, there's like so much traffic of, especially during busy times, like grocery stores, shopping malls, like those sort of things, like lots and lots of moving vehicles. And then of course, crossing the road, like even like something as simple as running across the street to the park where like the kids are excited. They see the prize that they want to get to and their friends and they just run for it. Right. And so these are all situations where it is like high risk points of a collision of a vehicle with a small body child. And the other issue around that is like kids are small, they're short. And so even like in a parking lot in particular, when you're, backing out, you like can't necessarily see like a small kid walking or running behind your vehicle. Like those are really important points to stay safe. And so for us, the rules are always, if we're walking off the sidewalk, hand has to be held. Like has to be held when we're walking, or it's like with our older kid, like she kind of shows us that she can walk across the street safely with us, like with line of vision, kind of making sure that there aren't any vehicles, but like parking lots are always holding hands. Yeah. And then when I'm coming home, like if I know that my husband has just gotten home recently with the kids from school, I like actually literally call him up on the phone in my car. And I'm like, are you guys out of the garage? Just to make sure that there is like no one in the garage, or he has like, or I wait for him to like remove them from the garage before I back my vehicle in just to make sure that, again, like you can't see those small, short bodies. And so to make sure that they're safe before I bring my car into the garage.
No, that's so important. I've seen this, Toronto and Edmonton, different cities, different sort of parking and scenarios. We have like our big subway system and the streetcars that are going all the time, and that can be really busy. So again, I agree with you. We're always holding hands with the kids, or that we get each other. One of the things I do with the kids, because we walk them to school in the morning and we cross a number of alleys as well. Alleys are a big source where you can't see around the corner. We always stop at those pieces, even if they're on their bike. We're always like, you have to stop at every single intersection. You need to look. And I'm trying to teach them as well and say, because I want them to feel confident that, and so I'm like, you tell me when it's safe to go. And then they look both ways and they tell me, they're like, yeah, Mom, it's good to go. And then we walk together holding hands. So eventually over time, we're not going to be able to hold our kids' hands when they're, they're not going to want to hold our hands when they're you're getting close to that, right? With your elder one.
I mean, my daughter says that she still is going to hold my hand until she's 16, but I don't think that that's actually going to happen.
That's very sweet. I love that. My 5-year-old's ready to stop right now. Yeah, he's like, exactly. I'm good. Tell me a little bit, your third biggest fear was around water safety. So that's also one of my big concerns.
Yeah. So it's important to remember that anyone can drown in as little as a cup of water. So it's not just pools or like, lakes or oceans or like, natural bodies of water. Bathtubs are a big one as well. And all you need is like a little bit of water in the bathtub to be potentially a drowning risk. I have seen like I'm just going to like, I don't even know how I'm going to say like the screams of parents.
Yeah.
When there are devastating things that happen is like etched in my brain forever. Right. And so there have been numerous circumstances where a child has come in, whether it's a pool, bathtub. Like honestly, those are the two big ones, like pools and bathtubs, where it's like, well, I just like turned away for a second, right? And that's all it takes is like seconds for this to happen. And so for me, when it comes to being around bodies of water or bathtubs, it is like constant supervision all the time. Like there's like a parent in charge or one or two parents, like if we're at a pool with friends or whatever, like we do checks with the parents first of like, okay, who is going to be in charge of like watching the kids? It's not like you don't have a drink in your hand. You're not like chit chatting. It's like you are in charge of watching the kids. And then, like take shifts or whatever it is. But like there always is parental supervision in the bathtub or in near bodies of water. Personal flotation devices are really important too, right? So like life jackets, whether depending on where we are, like again, pools or, oceans, lakes, that sort of thing. If you're in like a boat or a canoe, our family canoes a lot in the summer, always have a life jacket on. Like that is like a non-negotiable. It doesn't matter how strong of a swimmer you are. When you're in an open body of water, it is a high risk environment. And so like making sure that you have life jackets on all the time. What is your approach to water, Sheila?
Very similar. If I can share, we had a very close family member drown a couple of summers ago. Very good swimmer. And it happened while boating. They had just gotten this boat. It was like a split second kind of piece where he would have been wearing a life jacket, but he wasn't in that moment. And it was seconds. And it was very shocking to everyone because we were like, he was a good swimmer. Like, how did that happen? And I'm sure you see this in adults and kids who are actually very skilled at swimming. It can be unpredictable sometimes if your foot gets caught or something happens in that moment, or you swallow water and you can't come up. So, I think that's created, I've seen it in the Emerge Again when I was a resident, but also having it happen in our own personal lives in it was devastating. We continue to feel the ramifications of this. And as a result, what we do is make sure that our kids do have swimming classes. We talk about swimming safety. We never run around a pool or any body of water without somebody, like you said. I think that's great that you take turns as parents kind of rotating through. We keep our kids within distance of especially because they're learning. They're not skilled swimmers. If we're near the water, they're in life jackets. We probably, because of our personal experience, separate from seeing it medically, I think we take extreme precautions with it because it can happen so quickly.
Yeah.
It is one of those things that when you hear that sound of a parent or a loved one realize that someone is drowning, it is something you will never forget.
No, it's not. And for me, I think part of the reason that I have these, what I call probably rational fears is because of like, I can immediately put myself in the shoes of that parent.
Yeah.
Of when there is this like, freak accident that nobody was expecting or anticipating. And like in a second, your life changes. And so like, I don't know. I mean, for me, like in being in a pediatric ER, I have found that like post kids has actually been more challenging for me because then every time I see a kid that's the same age or close to age of one of my children that comes in with something bad, it immediately, I can like place myself in that scenario and then worry about my kids. It's actually a really challenging environment to be in as a parent because it's a lot of it is like probably overkill, but like, I don't know, prevention is the best medicine. And like, I'd rather be maybe more nervous about it or more kind of, put more safety measures into place to prevent those things from happening if I can.
I agree with you. I think we can't help but being extra cautious because we see it and we know the reality. I think sometimes we go through life thinking like that happens to other people. But when we see it happen directly to our patients, it's quite, it's hard not to internalize that. So I'm hopeful that you get that support also when you're a human and you feel those things. I certainly feel those things as a physician when I'm working in my practice and I see my patients go through that. You can't help but apply it to your own life a bit. I've tried to shift it because it can be a source of anxiety. I try to shift it into, okay, this is knowledge. This is why we're doing this podcast today, is not to scare you, although I realize that a lot of the things that we're talking about are quite scary to think about. But we have to think about these things in order to prevent them from happening. And knowledge and talking about it, talking to our kids about these different types of ways of preventing injuries, understanding why, like we said earlier, like I'm cutting your grapes because this reason. I'm suggesting you wear a helmet because your brain is important and your spinal cord is important. I'm suggesting not to go on a trampoline for this reason. Giving your kids that information is also very important beyond just saying don't do it. And so hopefully, I feel like we can do a part 2 on this, Shaz, because we focused a lot on kids and the emerge. We could do an adult one as well, because I think it could be super helpful to our listeners to also specifically talk about adult scenarios. We haven't touched upon certain things like substance use and driving and other things that we know are really important around injury prevention and avoiding the emerge that we can really get into. So perhaps we do a part 2.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because there's a lot of really great discussion in the pediatric world, but there are lots of, as you know, I work in both pediatric and adult emergency departments. And so similar, but also very different preventative things that we can talk about in the adult world as well.
So we always wrap up with a prescription. So today we really focused on kids' health, avoiding the emerge. So Shaz, can you share what your prescription for our listeners is today?
Yeah, absolutely. So for, all the adults out there that have young kids in their lives, whether it's in whatever capacity it's in, I think for me, the prescription is to trust your gut, and that anticipation is really important. And so thinking about scenarios and what potential injuries or events could happen around those scenarios is a really good mental exercise to recognize potential hazards. And then in recognizing them, you can address prevention and put boundaries around that. And so that's number 1. And then number 2 that we've talked about is just having open dialogue with your kids, whether, to set them up for success in the future, but also to make sure that they have bought into the rules and boundaries that you have to kind of make that as easy and as smooth as possible.
Thanks so much, Shaz. I've learned so much from you. I always learn from you in terms of what you see in the emerge. So I really appreciate your take and you sharing this. And thank you to everyone for tuning into the Doc Talk today. As a reminder, the Doc Talk is for general information purposes only. This podcast is not intended to replace medical advice from your doctor. While we are doctors, we are not your doctor. So please always speak to your own healthcare provider for questions related to your personal health needs.
And please be sure to follow us on social media at The Doc Talk. And please send us your questions and topic suggestions. We love taking suggestions from you. And in fact, we do start most of our episodes with questions from our listeners. So please be sure to send us a DM and let us know what you want to hear about. Thanks for tuning in today.